The British Isles have always been considered lands filled with enormous mysteries. Before the arrival of the Romans, they were even considered magical. But after Roman rule over much of the territory, many things began to change. The culture of the Latins began to spread, and the belief in a monotheistic religion, where one god rules sovereignly over the universe, spread throughout Brittany. But the influence of the ancient gods of Brittany had not left the land, and their most fervent believers and priests were considered to possess supernatural powers. But Rome's hegemony over the islands had come to an end. The great empire fell, and a dark period began in England. The lands were subjugated to greed and the thirst for power. Brothers fought against brothers in a never-ending war for dominance of the Isles. The cities, glorious in the past, became decadent after the demise of the Romans. The invasion of England by the barbarian tribes of Angles and Saxons seemed a clear sign that God had abandoned those lands. But it had been prophesied that the return of two brothers would again give light to those lands. They were Ambrosius and Uther Pendragon. The brothers fought against the fierce Saxon barbarians and the tyranny of Vortigern. On the battlefields, they regained the right to the crown of Brittany. Ambrosius's reign was short, and his younger brother dictated the fate of the land. Uther Pendragon was recognized as a brave warrior, but not all nobles fully recognized his authority. For several years, Uther warred against the Saxons and increased his kingdom through conquests. The hard heart of the King of Brittany, who had never experienced the pain of passion, was about to be shuddered by an unexpected visit. Along with her husband, Duke Gorlois of Cornwall, entered the room the Duchess Igraine, the most beautiful woman Uther had ever seen. The Duke introduced his wife to the sovereign. Igraine seemed to come from the mystical Avalon, a land where magic still held much power. During the reception hosted by the king, the Duke of Cornwall realized that the king's intentions towards his wife were not the best. Igraine told her husband that the king had made her an indecent proposal. The Duke was furious, but he managed to control his anger until the end of the reception. At dawn, the Duke and his wife left the royal castle quickly, without saying goodbye. But one of Uther's guards, who had witnessed the visitor's departure, quickly told the king of the episode. The king was furious and ordered a messenger to go after the Duke to deliver him a letter of royal summons. The message said that the Duke and Duchess would have to present themselves immediately before the king. Uther knew that it was inexcusable duty of his vassal to attend the summons of his king, and refusal of such a duty could be considered an act of treason. But the Duke knew that the king's real intention was to seduce his wife. For this reason, he told the messenger that he would not return to the castle with her, for he had an urgent business that required his attention. Overwhelmed by passionate rage, the king ordered his army to be assembled to march to Cornwall and teach the rebellious Duke a lesson. The Duke of Cornwall ordered his fortress to be reinforced in preparation for war. The armies of the Duke and Uther met on the battlefield, but the outcome was inconclusive. The Duke chose to defend himself inside his castle, as he thought that the king lacked the necessary strength for a successful siege. Uther besieged the fortress of Tintagel, where Duke Gorlois and Igraine were taking refuge. The siege had been going on for a long time, and did not seem close to an end, as the Duke had managed to accumulate many supplies before the arrival of the royal troops. The king was obsessed with Igraine. That long siege did not seem to positively contribute to Uther's mental health. With no other way out, Uther called Sir Ulfius, the king's right-hand man, and said, "There is only one man who can end my affliction, and you know who he is." "My king, we have no need of that devil-worshipper. You are the rightful king of Brittany, anointed by God." "Yes, I know who I am, but I believe that God is not very inclined to help one of his chosen ones disrespect one of the 10 Commandments." Disgruntled, Ulfius headed galloping off to the Welsh lands to recruit the king's old friend.
"Who is there?"
"Sir Ulfius, by order of King Uther."
"What took you so long? I've been ready for hours."
"You swindler! You don't impress me by pretending you were already waiting for me."
"Don't be an imbecile, Ulfius. I have been waiting for years for the true calling of Albion Island."
The king was heartened to see Ulfius approaching with his friend.
"Merlin, my old friend, I thought I would never see that wrinkled face of yours again."
"Your gray hairs show that you too are not rejuvenating." Uther told Merlin that he had been upset ever since he had met the Duchess Igraine, and did not know where to turn, for that uncomfortable desire was consuming him from within.
"I know how to get you to unite with the beautiful Igraine, but it will come at a cost."
"I will pay whatever it takes to have just one night with that incredible woman."
"I will do as you ask, but this union will result in the birth of a child that you must hand to me."
"Would you sacrifice the child in one of your rituals?"
"Of course not. Your Majesty has been spending too much time with that simpleton Sir Ulfius. By the way, we need him here. He will play an important part in our plan."
With dusk, Sir Ulfius ordered the siege of the fortress of Tintagel to be lifted, and the men to return home. From high on the wall, the Duke of Cornwall sensed that Uther's army was showing weakness, and ordered his men to prepare for the attack. Gorloy and his knights left the fortress to crush Uther's retreating forces. Meanwhile, Uther and Merlin waited in hiding for the Duke's departure.
"The time has come."
Merlin threw his cloak away and began his ritual. Uther felt both fascination and fear as he watched that powerful druid invoke the forces of nature and ancestry. Merlin withdrew a powder from one of his pouches he had around his waist and threw it at the king. When the cloud of dust cleared, Uther had assumed the body form of the Duke of Cornwall. The king rode to the Duke's fortress.
"The Duke is back! Open the gates!"
Uther's disguise seemed perfect. He ordered his horse to keep ready, for he would not be long. The king went upstairs to the Duchess's room, where Igraine was standing with her daughter Morgana on her lap. The little girl ran to embrace her supposed father.
"Daddy is back!"
Uther avoided the child.
"Leave the room, child."
Morgana was taken from the room by one of Igraine's maids, but the girl sensed something very wrong. Uther approached his beloved, who was surprised to see the lustful look on her husband's face. The king possessed Igraine and unleashed all his passion. The loving couple awoke to Morgana's cries.
"Daddy is dead! Daddy is dead!"
Igraine ran to help her daughter, and Uther took the opportunity to leave the castle. The king left the fortress before dawn, and the Duke's army quickly returned.
"Daddy is dead!"
"Calm down, my child. It's all right." As the army approached, Igraine saw her husband's body carried by his men. Igraine ran to see what was happening.
"My condolences, madam. He died fighting bravely."
"But how?"
"The retreat of Uther's men was a trap. We were ambushed during the night by hundreds of archers."
"That's impossible. He visited me tonight."
"Surely it was his spirit, wanting to bid farewell to his beloved."
Igraine was comforted by her ladies-in-waiting and led to her room. Uther quickly led his army to the fortress of Tintagel to negotiate terms of peace. The Duchess and her 3 bereaved daughters received the king. Little Morgana stared at Uther with a gaze filled with the purest hatred.
"I want to seal a lasting peace between our families. Through marriage, we will form an indissoluble alliance. In this way, your family's rights will be preserved."
A few days later, the marriage was celebrated between Uther and Igraine. During their wedding night, she revealed to the king that she was pregnant.
"And whose child is this? The Duke's?"
"I thought so, but I don't know anymore. He did not visit my room for months. But on the night of his death, I was visited by his spirit." Uther felt relieved to know that his wife's child was his own. The child was born, He was a beautiful, healthy boy. But Merlin soon appeared at Tintagel Castle to fetch what he had been promised.
"The time has come, my king. Deliver me the child as promised."
Uther snatched the child from the arms of the mother, who tried to resist. "Give me back my boy!" Uther handed the boy to Merlin.
"Do not hand your son over to this monster, my lord, I beg you. He is the sole heir to the throne of Brittany."
"I made a promise to this man, and the time has come to keep it."
"Have you got eyes, Sir Ulfius?"
"These eyes have seen dozens of wizards like you end up on the edge of the sword of men of God."
"Is that so? Then perhaps you are not as useless as I thought. Come with me. We must secure the future of the islands."
Merlin and Sir Ulfius rode together to the lands of a noble knight known as Sir Ector. Merlin handed the child to the knight and asked him to raise the child as an adopted son. "Take good care of the child, Sir Ector. The fate of our kingdoms is in your hands." Merlin and Sir Ulfius departed and left the child in the care of an honorable knight, who would have much to teach the boy, who would become known as Arthur. Uther Pendragon, the king of the Britons, had given his firstborn son to Merlin. With his succession assured, Uther wanted to consolidate his reign. The king wanted to fulfill the prophecy that Merlin had once told him. This prophecy revealed that a great king would arise, uniting all the lands under a single monarch, who would bring peace and prosperity to the Isle of Brittany. Uther needed courageous allies to be that king. For this mission, he gathered the best and noblest warriors in Brittany. Merlin guided the king to a region where there was an exotic geological formation by the sea.
The ancients said that the gods had established here the foundations of the kingdom that would bring light to Brittany.
"Upon these strong foundations I will erect the capital of my kingdom. This fortress shall be known as Camelot." To bring this colossal work to fruition, the king required his vassals to contribute a large sum of resources and labor. The construction of the most splendid fortress progressed at a good pace, but even so, it would take several years to complete the castle. But many were not satisfied with the construction of the palace. Some nobles did not want to pay those tributes, and the clergy hated the idea of a new capital being erected in a place so sacred to the pagan Celts. Besides internal conflicts, the threat of Saxon invaders destabilized Uther's government. The king summoned the armies of his vassals to fight the invaders. He did not suspect that some were plotting against their lord. Together with his council of war, Uther set the strategy for the great battle that would take place the next day. He knew that the Saxons were brave warriors. Therefore, using only brute force would not be the best strategy. The next day, Uther positioned himself at the vanguard of his army to lead the attack against the Saxon lines. Realizing the king's vulnerability, the Saxon leader ordered an all-out assault by his army. After all, if Uther fell, all of Britain would collapse as well. Uther realized that his enemy had taken the bait and instructed his aide to order troops hidden in a nearby grove to attack the flanks of their opponents. The king, in shock, was slow to realize why his vassals did not attack. Uther had been betrayed. Even outnumbered, the king and his men fought with incredible bravery. Uther was gravely wounded in battle, but even that did not make him stop fighting. The chief of the Saxon warriors realized that, to defeat his opponent, he would have to sacrifice a large part of his army. After all, the Bretons, like hunted beasts, fought with remarkable ferocity. He therefore ordered a strategic retreat, allowing the army to preserve energy to fight another day. The Bretons celebrated the victory, not realizing that it was a true Pyrrhic victory. "Bring me the royal sword! Attack!" Realizing the king's vulnerability, the traitorous nobles decided to remove him from the throne. "Flee, my lord! We will cover your retreat!" The king tried to reach London, but his wounds were shedding blood, and his enemies were pursuing him. Without strength, The king fell from his horse. Uther felt the life leave his body when he heard Merlin's voice.
"Protect your sword, for the fate of all England depends on it."
Uther used all the strength he had left to raise his sword and stick it into a stone. "You will never have this sword, and without it, you will never sit on my throne." Many tried to pull the sword from the stone, but they said that only the true king could remove it. Those who tried to usurp the throne of Brittany ended up murdered by their rivals. For many years, the sword of Brittany waited for the true king. Many years had passed since the fall of Uther Pendragon, and the throne of Brittany remained vacant. Just after Christmas, all the nobles of the region were summoned by the Archbishop of London to praise God. But most were more interested in the tournaments and the disputes between knights, the festivities after the religious events. The best knights from the island of Brittany attended the tournament. Among them were Sir Ector, his son Sir Kay, and his young adopted son Arthur, his brother's squire. The knights with the best performance in the games could try to remove the Brittany sword, which was still attached to the rock. If anyone succeeded, that person would be considered the new king of Brittany. The novice knights fought each other in sword dueling tournaments, which were less prestigious than jousting. But in these contests, they amassed prestige to one day gain access to the First League. During the tournament, the blade of Sir Kay's sword broke. "Arthur, run to our tent and get me my spare sword before I am disqualified." The young squire ran at full speed to the camp, and on the way found the sword of Brittany carved into stone. He did not know the history of the sword and went on his way. Inside the tent, Arthur searched for the spare sword, but he only found the sheath already swordless. He had forgotten the sword at home. But the boy remembered the sword he had found on the way. He ran to the sword, not realizing that he was being watched. Not knowing that this was his father's sword and that it was stuck in the rock, Arthur tried to pull it out. He pulled the sword out of the rock with ease and was amazed at the quality of the weapon. But he had no time to waste and ran to the tournament. Arthur handed the sword to his brother. "Finally! I didn't think you would be back." Sir Kay was amazed when he saw the royal seal on the blade of the sword. "You must return to the arena now, or you will be disqualified." "Look, he has the sword of Brittany." Sir Kay was surrounded by curious onlookers who couldn't believe their eyes. "How did you get this sword?" "I took it from the stone, and therefore I am the new king of Brittany." It was then that Sir Ector appeared, together with the Archbishop of London. "Do you swear in the name of God that it was you who removed the sword from the stone?" Sir Kay was embarrassed and could not lie in front of his father and the Archbishop. "I did not tell the truth. It was Arthur who removed the sword." Most of the knights could not believe that the boy could have pulled that off, and asked him to prove what he had done. Arthur put the sword back in the rock. A huge knight pushed the boy and tried to remove the sword from the rock. He exerted enormous force, but could not move the sword. A line of knights formed, and they all tried to remove the sword, but without success. "Let the boy try again." The knights were surprised by the arrival of the famous Celtic wizard. "What is the son of the devil doing here?" "Ah, if I earned a coin every time I heard that, I'd be the richest man in Brittany." The people started shouting for them to let the boy try to remove the sword. With no alternative, they let the boy try again. Arthur removed the sword from the stone with ease, to the amazement of everyone present. "Just because he took the sword out, that doesn't mean he has a right to the throne."
"His right does not come from the fact that he drew an old sword from a stone. His right is in his blood. He is the firstborn son of Uther Pendragon."
"What nonsense! Your words have no value here." "But mine do."
Although I don't like this crazy old man, what he says is true. I was there when Merlin delivered the king's son to Sir Ector."
Sir Ulfius was considered one of the most respectable knights in those lands, and everyone knew him for being the right-hand man of the posthumous King Uther. Sir Ector approached Arthur, with some incredulity in his gaze. "When Merlin put you in my arms, I immediately called you my son. It is with great honor that I now call you my king." The knights, clergy, and commoners knelt before the young king, who had not yet realized what was happening. On the day of Pentecost, Arthur was crowned King of Brittany by the Archbishop of London. The young king was cheered by the nobles, who shouted, "Long live the king!" Arthur appointed Sir Ulfius as his right hand, and Merlin was ever present as his advisor. And so began the reign of King Arthur. After ascending to the throne of Brittany, Arthur, as had happened to his father, faced strong opposition from the nobles of the region. Many disputed his right to the throne and considered him a bastard. Others refused to kneel before a boy who was barely out of diapers. Arthur also had allies. However, it would be necessary to attract even more nobles to his cause, allowing the kingdom to be pacified. "Sir Ulfius, I know that my father had a strong friendship with the kings living on the continent."
"No doubt, sire. Your father knew the importance of having a true friend in times of need."
"We must re-establish bonds of friendship with these kings. United, our kingdoms will be stronger against our enemies. I am counting on your expertise to lead a delegation on my behalf, which will seek to establish a defensive alliance between our kingdoms."
"It shall be so, Your Majesty."
Ulfius crossed the channel to meet with King Bors of Gaul and his brother, King Ban of Benwick, a land known as Little Britain. Ban gladly received the offer of an alliance with Arthur, for his wife was pregnant, and the king wanted his future son to inherit a strong and secure kingdom. His son would be the most celebrated knight in history, known as Lancelot. With the reinforced armies of his allies, Arthur fought the revolting nobles and beat his opponents, pacifying Brittany. With much of his enemies now defeated, Arthur consolidated himself on the Breton throne. A new era of prosperity was born in England. Advised by Merlin, Arthur ordered the resumption of construction of the citadel of Camelot, one of King Uther Pendragon's dreams. The construction of the city required much sweat and tears, but it began a new golden age in England. Prosperity spread throughout Brittany, and Arthur became beloved by the people. The civil war between rebellious nobles and the rightful king of Brittany increased the number of knights on the march. Noble warriors without lords or banished warlords wandered around England aimlessly and without purpose. With nothing to lose, these knights were dangerous men. Arthur was riding with Merlin by his side, discussing the fate of Britain, when they spotted a knight in distress. It was Sir Griflet, Arthur's newest knight, tasked with eliminating a walking knight causing trouble in the area. The young man was gravely wounded and could barely support himself on his horse. "My God, who did that to you?"
"It was an extraordinarily strong wandering knight in armor, black as night. He refuses to give way to anyone who intends to cross the woods he protects."
"Merlin, do you know who this man is who dares attack one of my knights?"
"In these lands, I believe that only a man of that description would have such audacity. Pellinore. He is now a landless nobleman, but was once a king. But even ruined, he is still a great and dangerous warrior."
"I will take care of him. Stay here and look after Sir Griflet." Arthur rode off toward the woods, ignoring Merlin's advice not to face the Black Knight. Inside the woods, Arthur was impressed by the various shields hanging from the tree branches. In the coat of arms, he recognized the weapons of some experienced and valiant knights, all defeated by Pellinore. At the end of the corridor of intimidating shields stood the Black Knight, a clearly imposing figure.
"This path is closed. Turn around or you will regret it."
Arthur, at that moment, had no insignia identifying him as king. He found this beneficial, as he could gauge people's character without them being intimidated by his title. "I am here to avenge Sir Griflet and free this passage once and for all."
"So be it, but don't think you will have the same luck as your friend, for you will not escape from here alive."
The two knights violently clashed their spears on their opponent's shield.
"Finally, a worthy opponent. I was tired of taking down knights who would barely serve as squires."
They attacked each other again, and stalemate prevailed. Arthur was already a knight with some experience, but he had never faced such a skilled opponent, and he was motivated by his performance up to that point, which boosted his confidence. In the third confrontation, the Black Knight's spear found a gap in Arthur's armor and struck him in the shoulder.
"You look like one of those knights who surrenders right after the first superficial wound."
With his pride wounded, Arthur's blood boiled, and he took up the royal sword. The sword duel was violent, but despite being wounded, Arthur was fighting very bravely against a stronger opponent. Pellinore landed a powerful blow that broke the king's sword. The movement was only interrupted when it hit Arthur's helmet. He fell off his horse, but one of his feet remained attached to the stirrup. The horse started to run and dragged the king out of the forest. The wounded Arthur collapsed, and his fate seemed uncertain. When he regained his senses, he saw the image of the most beautiful young woman he had ever met. He thought she was an angel, for he thought he had died and was in heaven.
"Are you an angel? Your time has not yet come. My name is Lady Guinevere, daughter of Leodegrance."
Far away, the Black Knight returned to his cabin in the forest, where he protected what he considered to be his greatest treasure. There was his wife and his youngest son. The boy had been touched by the Holy Spirit, and would one day be the knight known as Percival. Arthur finally recovered from the injuries caused by the Black Knight, but great sorrow fell upon the king, for the royal sword had become broken and lost. Without the glorious sword of Brittany, he feared that his throne would be further challenged.
"Don't worry, Your Majesty. Good may come out of evil."
What good can come after such a great loss?
"The sword of Britain has fulfilled its role and brought you here, but now we will go in search of the sword that will lead you to greatness."
Arthur and Merlin set off in search of the weapon that would change the lands of England forever. They arrived at the shores of a lake covered by mists. Merlin opened his arms and began to chant in the language of the ancient peoples of Brittany. Impressed, Arthur felt the wind getting stronger and stronger as Merlin sang. The gust of wind Merlin caused forced the mists to dissipate, revealing an unusual scene. In the middle of the lake, a female hand was holding a sword just above the water level. Whose arm is that, holding such a wonderful sword?
"She is one of the ladies of the Lake of Avalon, women gifted with the magic of the ancient peoples."
Isn't the legendary citadel of Avalon just a legend?
That's what priests and bishops want people to think.
Finally, Merlin. I thought this day would never come.
Hello, Vivain.
Who are you? I feel as if you are from another world. I am Vivain, Lady of Avalon, and leader of the Ladies of the Lake. Despite our differences, we share the same world. With your help, I hope we will continue to share it.
My wish is only to ensure the peace of all the peoples of Great Albion. Your intention seems sincere, and that is why you will have Avalon on your side. Look at this sword. Its name is Excalibur. Its destiny is to belong to the man who will bring a golden age to all Brittany. If you think you are this man, row to the Lady of the Lake and she will judge you to see if you are worthy to have the sword. If you are not, she will take you to the bottom of the lake, where you will perish." Arthur bravely pushed the boat back into the water and began rowing toward the sword. Arthur stretched out on the bow, attempting to reach the sword. But just as he managed to grab it, the lady gripped his wrist tightly, and her eyes glowed frighteningly like embers. She pulled him under the water and said to him, "Make yourself worthy of that sword." Arthur, frightened and drenched, returned to the surface with the sword in his arms. The king took the sword out of its sheath and felt an immense power, something he had never felt in his life. "I hope you are right about this new pupil of yours, for the fate of all Brittany will be in his hands." When Arthur returned to the riverbank, the fairy Vivain had already left.
"And now, my king, what shall we do?"
"Now the time has come for my revenge." Arthur and Merlin rode again to the forest of the Black Knight. Arthur got down from his horse and challenged the Black Knight to a sword duel, since the king had no spear for jousting. Pellinore was known as one of the best swordsmen in the region and gladly accepted the challenge. The fight began, and Arthur fought with great courage and confidence. This was amazing, considering the last duel between them, where he was almost killed by his opponent. With one strong blow, Arthur knocked the knight's sword out of his hand. Disarmed and powerless, the knight had no choice but to surrender. "I don't know where you got that magnificent weapon. With it you look like a new man. I am Pellinore, the dethroned king of Listinois. If you spare my life, I swear that my family and I will be loyal to you." "I know that you have rebelled against me in the past, but my kingdom is now entering a new cycle, where unity will give way to division. So, it will be an honor to have such an experienced knight at my side." After reconciling with King Pellinore, Arthur and Merlin decided to return home.
"What do you think of your new sword?"
"It is simply magnificent."
"But tell me, do you like the sword better or the sheath?"
"The sheath is beautiful, but obviously I like the sword better. It is much more valuable."
"You are wrong. Although it is a superb sword, the sheath is even more valuable."
"How can it be more valuable than the sword?"
"This sheath is enchanted, and he who has it will never die in combat. Even if you are seriously wounded, you will not die. Take good care of this sheath, for your life will be safe as long as you have it."
Arthur and Merlin arrived in Camelot, and their army was ready by order of Sir Ulfius. One of his allies was in danger, and only Arthur could save him from his enemies. The small kingdom of Camelot, a historical ally of the Pendragon family, was in trouble. King Leodegrance had no male heir. Thus, whoever married his daughter Guinevere would be heir to the title of Camelot. Welsh nobles and the Duke of Northumbria had an interest in a union between Lady Guinevere and the Duke to consolidate the power of this coalition in the region. With the support of King Rhys, the Duke of Northumbria gave the king an ultimatum. Either he delivered his daughter, or the fortress would be reduced to dust, and his subjects would be sold into slavery. Leodegrance prayed to the heavens, for his few soldiers could hardly contain an assault on the fortress. His only hope was the distress call sent to King Arthur. The King of the Britons and his men marched quickly to Camelot, for Arthur would never deny helping an ally in a time of need. The coalition of Leodogrance's enemies was surprised by the arrival of Arthur and his men. The northern enemies proved to be valiant, but unable to hold back the royal army and its incredible knights. After easily defeating the first wave of enemies, King Arthur wanted to negotiate. "I know that your men are sons of the same land that gave birth to my soldiers, and that the sons of Brittany do not run away from the fight when it is necessary. But there is no need to stain the sacred soil of Brittany with the blood of hundreds of your sons. The champions of both can fight in a singular duel to reveal the true will of God." The Duke was pleased with that proposal, for he was an experienced warrior and the northern champion in jousting, and he accepted the duel readily. The Princess of Camelot beckoned to her champion, asking him to come forward. As Arthur approached the young lady, he recognized her beautiful features. How could he forget the beautiful features of the young lady who had saved his life days ago? Guinevere tied her handkerchief to the tip of Arthur's spear and wished him good luck for the clash. The two knights took up their positions and spurred their horses toward each other. A great bang was heard as the two spears collided. Due to the heavy impact, the Duke fell from his saddle and crashed terribly against the ground. Arthur got down from his horse and knelt beside the Duke, who was giving his last breaths while choking on his own blood in his throat. The king raised Guinevere's handkerchief, announcing his victory against the enemy, and the invading armies turned around and returned home. Arthur apologized for returning the princess her handkerchief in a sorry state, but thanked her for the good fortune of her talisman. King Leodegrance did not hold back and gave his savior a strong hug and promised to give him any reward he wished. "I apologize in advance, for what my heart most longs for is the same thing those rude villains wanted, the hand of the most beautiful princess this land has ever seen."
Not since the times of the great warriors like Achilles has there been a woman capable of winning so many hearts, and with the potential to generate so much discord. And so, as proposed in Homer's book, there is no better man than His Majesty to marry our Helen of Brittany. After all, no man will revolt against you in search of the love of Guinevere, your future queen." After promising his daughter to King Arthur, a splendid surprise was around the corner. "Do you know what that is?"
"A table?"
"Yes, but not just any table. This table symbolizes a dream your father had. Around this table will sit the best knights of this kingdom, and, under the command of the king, they will try to lead the kingdom of Brittany into an age of gold, where justice, kindness, and peace will prevail."
Arthur marveled at his late father's dream, and even vowed that he would make that dream a reality. Arthur said goodbye to his bride and future father-in-law, saying that he would meet them again at his new castle next summer, where the royal wedding would be celebrated. Summer had finally arrived. After decades of hard work, the citadel of Camelot was finally built. The splendor of that city was like a beacon for all Brittany, a symbol of honor, justice, and compassion. The men of Brittany would achieve unimaginable things. That was undoubtedly a rare jewel in a world covered by darkness and corruption. The city was crowded. For that day, the long-awaited marriage between King Arthur and Princess Guinevere of Camelot would be celebrated. Seeing his future queen enter the church, Arthur had no doubt that he had married the most beautiful woman in the world. All the guests were delighted to see the bride in the bridal pageant. Except Merlin, who sensed that such a beautiful bride could ruin the kingdom. The couple made their vows in front of the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the kingdom of Brittany was left with a new queen. Arthur's subjects thrilled at their beautiful new queen, and they pronounced good wishes to the royal couple, wishing them health and that an heir to the throne of Brittany. It was a weekend full of celebrations, with parties in the streets, palace banquets, and tournaments. That same weekend, Arthur appointed the knights who would sit on the round table. Among them were his father-in-law, Leodegrance, his marshal, Sir Ulfius, his brood brother, Sir Kay, his nephew and bridal tournament champion, Sir Gawain, and many other distinguished knights. At this headless table, they would sit as equals and swear to be right in their actions, just and brave in times of war or peace. They were to be an example to other knights and to common men. These men would ride all over the island of Brittany, taking on evildoers, protecting the defenseless, and bringing justice to those lands. Their important conquests were a source of glory, and the golden age of those people, promised by the king, seemed to be near. The greatest desire of any knight in that land was, through his courageous deeds, to become a knight of the Round Table, sitting at the side of Arthur and his magnificent warriors. After the Order of the Knights of the Round Table was formed, it took a few years before a knight emerged who was different from the rest. His name was Lancelot, and his arrival would forever change the fate of Arthur's kingdom. When the young King Arthur took power, he was confronted with much internal dissent. Several nobles would rise up against him. But Arthur also had allies. King Ban of Benwick was one of them, and thanks to his help, Arthur succeeded in pacifying his kingdom. Back in his kingdom, which lay across the English Channel, King Ban would meet his youngest son, who had been born during his absence. He would be christened Galahad, but would go down in history with the nickname Lancelot. King Ban would soon find himself in serious trouble. There was a Frankish king named Claudius, whose expansionist ambitions and tyranny would make him a dangerous enemy of King Ban and his brother Bors. War was inevitable. The brother kings would lead their troops to engage King Claudius's large army that was stationed in the region of Gaul. Ban and Bor counted on the help of their young sons who had just been knighted, Sir Lionel and Sir Bors the Younger. A major battle ensued, and Arthur's allies would obtain a Cadmean victory. Despite winning the bout, the king's army had been all but destroyed. Additionally, King Bors would perish in battle, and the young knights Lionel and Bors were captured. King Ban returned to his fortress with the rest of his men, knowing that Claudius, despite his defeat, still had plenty of men in reserve. It would not be long before he would lay siege to his fortress. Ban understood that his fortress could hold out for a long time. Its fall would be inevitable. But Ban still had one last alternative.
"My dear, we must leave for Arthur's lands, where you and little Galahad will be safe. With the help of Arthur's army, we will drive Claudius's men from our lands."
Before the enemy army surrounded their fortress, King Ban, his wife Elaine, and their baby managed to escape. As they drove through a dense forest, Ban, who was a Christian, yet still attached to the old Breton gods, asked those to protect them during this dangerous journey. Ban was then hit by a projectile that knocked him off his horse.
"This time you won't escape, noble King Ban."
That was Claudius rejoicing his victory over his enemy. Ban cried out for his wife to flee and save his son's life. Elaine quickly galloped to the shores of a lake, but she knew she was being pursued. Her horse got bogged down in the mud and she could no longer advance, while Claudius's minions came closer. This was when, from the midst of the waters, a beautiful and noble figure emerged. It introduced itself as Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, and asked the queen to hand the child to her. She unbelievably walked on the mud without sinking. The Lady of the Lake had to push hard to separate the child from the mother's arms, who resisted and wept. With the child in her arms, who smiled at the Fairy of Avalon, She said that from that day forward, he would be known as Lancelot of the Lake. King Ban would be killed by Claudius, who usurped his throne. Elaine would join a monastery to wait for Vivien's promise to be fulfilled. As an adult, her son would return as a great knight and take back all that was rightfully his. After rescuing King Ban of Benwick's son from a dreadful fate, the Lady of the Lake took the child to Avalon, a mythical land whose ancient magic was still very much present. It was a beautiful spot embraced by nature, but apart from those who lived there, its location was entirely unknown. There lived the fairies of the lake, women gifted with extraordinary powers. Vivien knew that the baby's destiny was enormous and that his name would be sung all over the world. In the land of the ladies of the lake, he would be renamed Lancelot of the Lake. Morgana, King Arthur's half-sister, also lived in Avalon. She was being trained to become the future sovereign of Avalon. Morgana was astounded by the vital power emanating from the child. Lancelot was raised in that magical land and had a somewhat unique childhood. However, when he was around 10 years old, he was presented with his new guardian. His name was Sir Pelleas. He was one of King Arthur's best knights, saved by the Lady of the Lake when he had been mortally wounded. To prevent his death, Vivien took him to Avalon. Pelleas was a wonderful teacher and an accomplished fencer. He trained Lancelot to master different weapons. He also prepared the boy to master the arts of horsemanship and dueling. His student proved to be an exemplary learner, repeating each exercise until he reached perfection. Before long, the pupil had eclipsed his master. Sir Pelleas was proud to see this little boy develop into a magnificent knight. Lancelot was only 17 when he was gifted by the Lady of the Lake with beautiful, shining silver armor. "Lancelot, it is time for you to chart your own path. You must return to the land of the Bretons, and there you will not have to say your name, for soon everyone will know you for the deeds you undertake. Thank you for everything. I will bear the name of the lake with my own, and all the glory that shall come my way will be passed on to the people of Avalon." Lancelot left the fairyland behind, but carried with him a legacy of noble lessons handed to him by his masters. The Avalon Kingdom would never cease to be in his heart. King Arthur and some of his knights were crossing the land after putting down a criminal gang that was plaguing the region. The knights escorting the king included Sir Bedivere and Sir Gawain. But they ran into Lancelot riding from the opposite direction. "Hold here while I clear the way." "Make way, boy, or I'll have to take you by force." "Boy? If they still refer to me as a boy, perhaps striking another knight will help me get recognized next time." "Don't say I didn't warn you." The two knights charged at each other. Lancelot's powerful attack swept Sir Gawain off his saddle, and he rolled in the grass. Arthur was surprised by Lancelot's skill, as Sir Gawain was a multiple jousting champion. "Knight, are you as good with the sword as you are with a javelin?" My modesty would require me to say no, but in that case I'd be violating the truth. "Then let's duel." "Are you sure about that, my lord?" "Do not worry. I want to see what this boy is capable of." Arthur and Lancelot faced and studied each other carefully before going on the attack. Their swords clashed, and they both proved to be extremely proficient with the blade. "You are exceptionally good, my lord, but age is already affecting your speed." "Age? You cheeky boy." The taunts of the young Lancelot upset the king, and he started attacking out of anger. His reckless strikes gave the young knight opportunities he could not ignore. "Congratulations, young knight! The victory is yours." When Lancelot looked more closely at Arthur's sword, he recognized Excalibur, the magic sword kept by the ladies of the lake. "This is Excalibur! Then you are the king!" "What is your name? And how did you recognize this sword? Have you seen it before?" "My name is Lancelot of the Lake, and I first saw this sword in Avalon when I was a child." Arthur was glad to learn of the knight's background. He invited him to join his round table, as the king had never met a knight with such abilities. Lancelot was taken to Camelot, where he was made a knight of the Order of the Round Table. Arthur introduced him to his queen. And when the eyes of Guinevere and the knight met, they were entranced by each other. Lancelot was young and handsome, while the queen was the most beautiful woman Lancelot had ever seen. Making use of his glorious sword, Arthur consecrated Sir Lancelot of the Lake as his newest knight. But before he could take his place at the Round Table, Sir Lancelot set off in search of fame, making his name known throughout Arthur's kingdom. Word of the arrival of a new knight at King Arthur's court was spreading throughout Camelot. He was rumored to be young, strong, and valiant, and his swordsmanship was on par with that of the noblest warriors of the Round Table. His name was Lancelot, who had come from distant lands in pursuit of glory and adventure. Always eager to welcome new champions to his court, Arthur invited Lancelot to a forthcoming tournament. It was the ultimate chance for the young knight to prove his worth and earn a place among the kingdom's bravest. Lancelot enthusiastically accepted the challenge. On the tournament day, he arrived in shining armor and a feathered helmet, riding a steed. His eyes glowed with the flame of youth and ambition. The tournament began, and Lancelot charged into battle with lion-like courage. He swept his opponents off their horses with accurate and powerful blows from his lance, showing uncommon dexterity and strength. Experienced and renowned knights tumbled before his dexterity, and the people were astonished by the skills of this young warrior. Lancelot's reputation grew with each victory. The people acclaimed him from the stands, and the other knights looked on with admiration and respect. Sitting on his throne, Arthur was smiling with satisfaction. He had found a new champion for his court, a warrior fit to sit at the Round Table. Queen Guinevere was also enamored of the young knight, beautiful, strong, and courteous. He looked like the model of the perfect knight. Lancelot dedicated his victory as a tribute to the queen's beauty, charm, and kindness. With every blow landed, every opponent defeated, every drop of sweat shed, everything was in her honor, and he swore he would always be willing to be her defender whenever necessary. As soon as Lancelot arrived at court, he found himself fascinated by Queen Guinevere's beauty and kindness. The admiration was mutual. In turn, the queen perceived in the knight not only strength and bravery, but also a rare nobility of spirit and gentleness. Casual meetings in the castle gardens, conversations at court festivities, glances exchanged during tournaments. A deep and unique friendship flourished between them, woven together by an undeniable attraction that they were both trying to contain. Mindful of their duties and the loyalty they owed to King Arthur, Lancelot and Guinevere struggled to keep that feeling under control, turning passion into admiration, desire into respect. But love grew stronger every day, threatening to break through the barriers of reason and caution. A chilly silence fell over the main hall of Camelot Castle. The merry bustle of the courtiers ceased altogether when a messenger, visibly worn out and covered in dust, entered the room, bringing with him ominous news. With a strained and burdened voice, he proclaimed the capture of Sir Ector and Sir Lionel, both taken prisoner by the cruel Sir Turquin. The news crashed like a thunderbolt through the court, and there was a whisper of astonishment and apprehension in the hall. Lancelot, standing next to the king, was overcome with grief when he heard the name of his brother and cousin. The memory of his friendship and fondness for them both prompted him to act. He approached King Arthur without hesitation, and with a resolute look on his face, asked for permission to ride off and rescue the captive knights. Knowing of Lancelot's bravery and loyalty, Arthur immediately granted him his request. Moved by a sense of urgency, Lancelot wasted no time. He headed to the royal stables, where he chose his fastest and strongest steed and fitted it with his shining armor and sharp sword. Within minutes, he was already riding through the citadel gates, on his way to rescue his relatives. Sir Turquin, the source of all this distress, was reveling in his latest conquest. He was the very opposite of everything a knight should represent. Driven by ruthlessness and a thirst for power, he scorned codes of honor and chivalry, taking delight in subduing and humiliating his opponents. His castle, nestled in an arid and inaccessible region, was more like a prison than a fortress. In his damp, dark cellars, Turquin held captive dozens of knights, most of them knights of Arthur, who had been defeated in battle and stripped of their freedom and dignity. Turquin's reasons were as obscure as his soul. Some said he acted out of pure evil, taking delight in wreaking havoc on people. Others claimed that he sought revenge against King Arthur and his knights, nurturing a deep hatred for the order and justice they represented. Some said that Turquin was fueled by excessive ambition, dreaming of one day destroying the Round Table and taking power for himself. After riding for days through inhospitable and deserted lands, Lancelot finally reached Sir Turquin's dominions. The road, ever darker and more sinister, led through dense forests and rugged valleys, where silence was broken only by crows cawing and the wind howling. As Lancelot came around a bend in the road, he spotted a group of horsemen escorting a young prisoner. Cautiously drawing closer, he spotted the coat of arms on the prisoner's shield. It was Sir Gaheris, one of the youngest knights of the Round Table, and Gawain's brother. Angered by the sight, Lancelot didn't hesitate to intervene. With a war cry echoing through the hills, he drew his sword and launched into the attack, stunning Gaheris' captors. With one agile movement, Lancelot struck down the first knight, dodged the attack, and, in a sharp counter, defused another opponent, who fell backwards, surprised by his opponent's strength. Yet another knight tried to attack Lancelot, but was met with a sword blow that sent him crashing to the ground. The metallic sound of armor colliding with stone echoed through the valley, blending with the pained cries of the fallen knights. His sword, gleaming in the afternoon sun, danced across the air, tracing a light trail with each blow he struck. Shields were shattered, helmets were battered, and armor was pierced by the relentless blade. The other knights, on seeing Lancelot's ferocity, faltered. Cowardice had already gripped their hearts and they fled. Sir Gaheris admired Lancelot and was in awe of the dexterity of the knight who had just freed him. Lancelot was not just a warrior in his eyes, but an avenging angel, sent to punish those who dared to challenge justice and honor. Anxious to help rescue his brother, and overwhelmed by Lancelot's courage, Gaheris offered to accompany him. But Lancelot, mindful of the dangers that awaited them, declined the offer. However, he proposed a plan. Gaheris would go back to Arthur's court and report the situation to the king, asking him to gather reinforcements and take them to Turquin's castle. In the meantime, Lancelot would infiltrate the fortress and try to release the prisoners. Although unwilling to leave Lancelot alone, Gaheris agreed. With a handshake and a grateful stare, Gaheris said goodbye to Lancelot and set off towards Camelot, while the noble knight headed for Turquin's castle, ready to face evil and rescue his fellow captives. Seeking to rescue his kidnapped relatives, Lancelot finally arrived at Sir Turquin's castle, perched on top of a precipitous cliff, like a predator prowling the desolate landscape. Its tall, imposing walls seemed to defy anybody who dared to draw near. Yet this sinister atmosphere in the air did not intimidate Lancelot. With unshakable resolve, he rode up to the castle gates and, raising his voice, challenged Sir Turquin to a duel. "Sir Turquin, step out of your lair and face me in single combat. You, so contemptuous of honor and justice, will now have the chance to prove your worth against a proper knight." The ensuing silence was broken only by the cawing of crows flying over the castle. The heavy wooden doors opened with a bang, and Sir Turquin strode out, mounted on a black steed and wearing armor as dark as night. With an expression of cruelty and arrogance, his face contorted into a grim smile upon seeing Lancelot. "Well, oh well, what do we have here? Yet another Camelot knight is coming to challenge me in my own castle. Such impudence!" "This is not about impudence, Sir Turquin, but about justice. You have taken noble knights captive, besmirching the honor of chivalry. I have come to free them and make you pay for your crimes."
Crimes!
Turquin taunted with a loud laugh. "Force is the only offense I recognize, and I'm stronger than any of you. I've already defeated dozens of Round Table knights, and you will be just one more. We shall see. Let the Lord decide who he thinks has the truth." Before long, both knights pitted their wits against each other, initiating a duel that would go down in the history of chivalry. Lancelot's rage collided with Turquin's brutality in an epic clash between light and darkness, honor and dishonor. The clashing sound of swords rang out like thunder, and sparks burst in the air as Lancelot and Turquin crossed blades. With raw, savage strength, Turquin charged forward with fierce blows, attempting to crush Lancelot with the sheer weight of his sword. But Lancelot remained steadfast and serene, deftly warding off the blows. Lancelot's dexterity and agility shone through with every movement. He moved with the agility of a leopard, dodging Turquin's strikes and looking for gaps in his opponent's defense. With a firm and experienced hand, his sword suddenly seemed to have a life of its own, delivering blows that were aimed at the weak points in Turquin's armor. The battle continued when Lancelot, making the most of a reckless moment by his opponent, managed to strike a powerful blow. His sword struck Turquin's helmet with a heavy impact, sending him reeling backwards. Turquin, now feeling trapped, tried one last desperate blow, but Lancelot anticipated it, dodging the sword and driving his blade into his enemy's chest. Turquin groaned in pain. With his sword pointed at him, Lancelot said, "Surrender yourself, Sir Turquin. Victory is mine." With his face twisted by pain and hatred, he spat blood on the ground, but still cursed, "I will never surrender to a Round Table knight. I'd rather die than become Arthur's prisoner." With a heavy sigh, Lancelot readied himself to strike the final blow. However, before he could act, Turquin drew his dagger and thrust it into his own chest. Lancelot gazed at Turquin's body with a combination of sadness and relief. The battle had been fierce, but justice prevailed. He had redeemed the honor of the imprisoned knights and wiped out a major threat to Arthur's kingdom. Now all that remained was for him to free the captives and return to Camelot with his mission accomplished. With Turquin now dead, and with the help of Sir Gaheris, who had just returned with reinforcements from Arthur's court, Lancelot forced the fortress garrison to surrender and entered the castle. The blood trails of the tyrant's victims dotted the path towards the dungeons, where the captive knights awaited their fate in humidity and darkness. With every step Lancelot took, the sound of the chains and the moans of the prisoners rang off the walls, exacerbating the feeling of oppression and injustice. When he reached the dungeons, Lancelot was met with a regrettable scene. Dozens of knights, who had once been proud and courageous, were now chained and dejected, with hope almost gone from their eyes. Lancelot spotted Sir Lionel and Sir Ector among them, his family members, their armor corroded and their faces stained with fatigue. The two knights, upon hearing the familiar voice, raised their heads in disbelief. "Lancelot, is that really you?" "Yes, indeed. I've come to free you and restore your dignity." With Gaheris' help, Lancelot broke the chains and freed the captive knights. There was joy and relief in the dungeon, and the knights, released from Turquin's oppression, gratefully embraced Lancelot with admiration. The knights left Turquin's castle together, now empty and silent, like a monument to defeated tyranny. The return of Lancelot and the rescued knights to Camelot turned into a triumph. The freed knights were greeted as heroes. With an open smile, Arthur welcomed Lancelot with open arms and praised his courage and gallantry. The celebrations went on for days, and Lancelot's name was again echoed in songs and stories, celebrating his victory over tyranny and his loyalty to the ideals of chivalry. Throughout the days that Lancelot was away, the Queen lived in constant worry. With each piece of information about Sir Turquin's cruelty, her anguish increased. and the fear of losing the knight she held so dear consumed her inside. The nights were endless, and her sleep was plagued by nightmares in which Lancelot was beaten and imprisoned by the tyrant. Now, with Lancelot safely back in Camelot, Guinevere could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The tension that had been trapping her was gone, giving way to a profound sense of gratitude and relief. But the experience had made her see more clearly the intensity of her feelings for Lancelot. The fear of losing him had exposed the extent of her feelings, an emotion that transcended mere awe and respect, and which brought her into constant conflict between reason and passion. As Guinevere watched Lancelot from the balcony, partaking in the celebrations, she felt a blend of happiness and melancholy. The joy of having him back countered the awareness of the passion sweeping through her heart. She knew that her bounded duty was to Arthur, her king and husband to whom she had pledged her allegiance. But every day her heart seemed to be drawn to Lancelot, the knight who had won not only her admiration, but also her affection. In the euphoria of the celebrations, Guinevere withdrew into her thoughts, reflecting on the future and the challenges ahead of her. Fate had brought Lancelot into her path in a way they could never have imagined, and now it was up to her to cope with this feeling growing in her chest, like a flower born among stones, for at no time had she wished to open herself up to this love. The atmosphere in Camelot was joyous and ecstatic at Lancelot's triumphant homecoming, bringing with him the rescued knights. But amid this general elation, Lancelot carried with him a restlessness that he could not dissipate. His relationship with Guinevere, heightened by the emotions he had experienced during her absence, had reignited the passion he was trying to keep under control. The intimate stares, the whispered conversations, the accidental touches, every encounter with the queen was a battle against seduction, a test of his loyalty to Arthur and the vows he had taken as a knight. Lancelot noticed that the fine line between admiration and love, respect and passion, was becoming increasingly tenuous, threatening to break at any moment. Haunted by this internal struggle, Lancelot found refuge in solitude. He would spend hours in the castle gardens, absorbed in deep reflection, or wandering through the nearby forests, trying to find peace in nature. But Guinevere's image pursued him wherever he went, and the memory of their meetings swept over him like a torrent, arousing contradictory feelings of joy and guilt. Conscious of the danger he represented to himself and the court, Lancelot made a difficult decision: to leave Camelot for a while and seek new adventures that would distance him from temptation and allow him to restore his lost poise. He knew that his relationship with Guinevere was a trap for both, a dangerous path that could lead them to ruin. With a heavy heart, but a resolute mind, Lancelot stood before Arthur and told him of his decision. "My king, I beg your permission to set out on a new mission. I feel the urge to serve the kingdom and prove my worth beyond the castle walls." Astonished by the sudden request, Arthur tried to convince Lancelot to remain in Camelot.
"Lancelot, you are one of my bravest and most loyal knights. Your presence here is precious and brings us boundless joy. Why would you want to leave?" Without revealing his true motives, Lancelot replied in evasive fashion, "My king, my hunger for adventure and my desire to serve the kingdom impel me to explore new horizons. I believe I can be of use to your subjects by clearing your lands of ruffians." Although reluctant, Arthur granted Lancelot permission. "If that is your will, Lancelot, I must not stop you. May good fortune be with you on your journey, and know that your absence will be felt in Camelot." Lancelot left without saying goodbye to Guinevere. They both knew that distance would be a heavy burden to carry, but also a way of safeguarding the honor and loyalty that bound them to Arthur and the kingdom. Lancelot rode off on his steed and left Camelot, putting behind him his court, his friends, and the forbidden love that haunted him. He was looking for new adventures,
but also for inner peace and redemption. The journey would be uncertain and long, but Lancelot knew it was the path he had to take to honor his vows and protect those he loved. Having ridden for weeks through distant kingdoms, Lancelot felt the weight of the journey on his shoulders. His once shining armor now bore the marks of dust and battle. His loyal steed, though strong and brave, was also wearing out. Resolved to give them both a well-deserved rest, Lancelot spotted a wood near a clear stream and ducked into the forest in search of shelter. Once he reached a sunny clearing, he dismounted and unbuckled the straps of his armor, allowing his body to relax and his mind to empty itself of the cares of court. He let his steed roam freely and laid down in the shade of a centuries-old oak tree, indulging in the silence and stillness of the place. As Lancelot rested, 4 queens entered the woods. They were Morgana le Fay, the mighty sorceress and half-sister of King Arthur, the Queen of North Gales, known for her exotic beauty and fiery temper, the Queen of Eastland, noted for her wisdom and wealth, and Sir Gawain's mother, a mature woman, but still towering and influential. When they saw Lancelot sleeping under the tree, the 4 queens were struck by the same emotion, infatuation. His masculine beauty, combined with the sense of strength and nobility that surrounded him, awakened an indescribable desire in them. Morgana swore to herself that she would hold him in her arms, no matter what the cost. The queens drew near in silence, watching him with curiosity and admiration. So the 4 queens, bound by a common desire, set about a plan to kidnap Lancelot and take him to their castle, where they would subject him to a variety of temptations and challenges, in the hope of winning his love and loyalty. With a subtle movement of her hands and an incantation whispered in an ancient tongue, Morgana cast a spell over Lancelot. A profound and irresistible sleep took hold of the knight, who sank into an unconscious stupor, oblivious to what was going on around him. Then, with the help of their servants, the 4 queens hauled Lancelot, still asleep, into a decked-out carriage and took him to a distant castle, concealed in a dense forest. Morgana's castle was a magical and mysterious place. Its walls were built of dark stone, and pointed towers rose into the sky, like threatening claws. Deep inside, labyrinthine corridors extended into lavish halls, furnished with exquisite tapestries and luxurious furniture. The castle had an atmosphere of witchcraft and magic permeating every corner, fascinating and frightening at the same time. Lancelot awoke in a sumptuous chamber with a soft bed and velvet curtains, but the beauty of the place could not shake the feeling of entrapment that oppressed him. He stood up, disoriented and confused, sensing that a spell was preventing him from using his strength to break out of the place. Just then, the door opened, and the 4 queens entered the room, their faces with enigmatic smiles.
Welcome to our castle, Sir Lancelot. We do hope you feel comfortable in your new home.
Where am I? What am I doing here? The Queen of North Gales, with a burning glance, replied,
You are here because we want you to be, Sir Lancelot. Each one of us has fallen in love with you and wants you as her lover.
Stunned by the words, Lancelot instinctively backed away. I am a knight of the Round Table pledged to King Arthur. I cannot reciprocate your feelings, for I have no more room in my heart for other women. Sir Gawain's mother interrupted him with an authoritative voice.
Do not be afraid, Sir Lancelot. We will not harm you. We only ask that you choose one of us to be your lover. You will have wealth, power, and all the love for which you could wish.
But Lancelot stood his ground. I appreciate your offers, noble queens, but my heart is with someone else. I cannot betray my vows and my heart. Thwarted by this refusal, the queens shot furious glances at Lancelot. Morgana felt her wrath grow at the knight's reluctance.
Very well, Sir Lancelot. If you cannot be swayed by love, perhaps you can be swayed by fear. You will be trapped in this castle until you comply with our wishes."
The knight was undeterred by the threat. "I would rather die than betray my principles. Do as you wish with me, but I will never forsake my honor." And with that, Lancelot was held captive in the castle of the Four Queens, unwilling to give in to temptations and threats, not knowing how he could ever break the spell that tied him to that place. A long time had passed since Lancelot had been taken prisoner by the Four Queens. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and the knight was finding himself increasingly engulfed in a wave of loneliness and frustration. The freedom he once experienced was now a distant memory. He spent the hours roaming around his cell, trying to keep his body and mind occupied. He exercised with the rage of a caged lion, fought against imagined enemies, and relived past battles in his memories. But nothing would dispel the distress of imprisonment, the longing for Camelot, for the Knights of the Round Table, and above all for Guinevere. Despite his suffering and uncertainty, Lancelot stood firm in his decision. He would not give in to the queens. He would not double-cross his vows and his love for Guinevere. Freedom was of no value if it came at the cost of his honor. However, Morgana would not give up on her plans. Obsessed with Lancelot, she resorted to all her magical powers to win him over. She conjured up spells and incantations, trying to influence the knight's mind, to detect his weaknesses, his deepest desires. The sorceress intently observed his mind, searching his thoughts, dreams, memories, and then she spotted it. She noticed Guinevere's image shining brightly in Lancelot's heart, a deep and unshakable love, the source of his strength and endurance. Morgana maliciously smiled. She had finally found Lancelot's vulnerability. Now she knew how to turn it to her advantage. With a cunning plot in mind, she set about using Lancelot's love for Guinevere as a weapon, to tamper with him, to shatter him, to finally have hold of him. As Lancelot was withering away in prison, an unexpected force worked in his favor. Eloise, a young lady in waiting, secretly admired the knight. Moved by his story and outraged by the wrongdoing of his confinement, she decided to help him. Eloise was gifted with a shrewd intelligence and a brave heart. She had been working in the castle for years, moving discreetly through the corridors and understanding every corner of the fortress like the back of her hand. She watched Lancelot from a distance, in awe of his resilience and courage despite adversity. Eloise crept into Lancelot's cell, bearing a stolen key and a daring plan.
"Sir Lancelot, I have come to free you."
Surprised by the young woman's appearance, Lancelot eyed her distrustfully.
"My name is Eloise, and I can no longer stand by while a noble knight like you rots away in this prison. I have come to help you escape."
Touched by the young woman's courage and generosity, Lancelot felt a spark of hope rise in his chest. How? The queens are powerful, and this castle is guarded by spells and loyal servants.
"Trust me, Sir Lancelot. Wear this cloak. It holds a fairy spell, and will help you hide in the shadows. I know the secret passageways and weaknesses of this fortress that not even Morgana could detect. Follow me, and I will lead you out of this place."
Thus, led by the valiant Eloise, Lancelot darted through the dark and labyrinthine corridors of the castle. They dodged sleeping guards, uncovered secret passages with Eloise, using her knowledge of the castle to protect them from danger. With every step, Lancelot was overwhelmed by the young maid's fearlessness and wit. She was not just a guide, but an unexpected ally, a guardian angel leading him through the darkness. For what felt like an eternity, they spotted a dim light at the end of the tunnel. As they emerged at the exit, Lancelot took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air of freedom inflate his lungs. "Thank you, Eloise. I'm now free again. I will never forget your bravery and your kindness. How can I ever repay this tremendous favor?"
"And I will never forget the day I helped free the magnificent Sir Lancelot of the Lake. but I need you to help my father, King Bandameis.
Bandameis was a righteous and honorable king, but his power was endangered by enemies and rivals who lusted after his lands. Lancelot resolved that he would use his knightly skills to defend the king and secure the safety of Eloise and her people. A few days into his journey, Lancelot reached the kingdom of Bandameis. He announced himself to the king, revealing his identity and connection with Eloise. Surprised and grateful for the renowned knight's presence, Bandameis received him with honors and offered him hospitality. During the banquet in his honor, Lancelot became aware that the king was gearing up for a tournament, where he would defend his title of nobility and his kingdom against ambitious opponents. Given the chance to fulfill his promise to Eloise, Lancelot offered to fight as the king's champion.
Sir Lancelot, your presence here is a gift from heaven. With your courage and skill, I'm sure we will win this tournament and ward off the enemies who threaten my kingdom.
True to his word, Lancelot got ready for the tournament. He knew that he was not only battling for Bandameis, but also for Eloise. The day of the tournament, Lancelot stepped into the arena with the assurance of a true champion. His helmet shone under the sun, and his armor cast an invincible glow. When his name was announced, the hearts of the knights trembled, as they had already heard of Lancelot's reputation as an undefeated knight. He met each opponent with courage and skill, taking them down one by one. He kept calm and focused, using his experience and skill to outsmart each opponent. As Bandameis' champion, Lancelot's victory in the tournament meant that the king kept his title and had his honor reinstated in the eyes of his suitors. The crowd burst into applause, and the overjoyed king embraced Lancelot in gratitude.
Sir Lancelot, you are a true hero. You have saved my kingdom and honored the memory of a noble knight. I will be forever grateful for your help.
With a pleased smile, Lancelot replied, I have merely fulfilled my duty, your majesty, and I have kept my promise to your daughter. Lancelot once again proved his nobility and loyalty, honoring his word and upholding justice, even in distant lands and on behalf of a young woman who risked it all to save him. After winning the tournament, Lancelot set off again, aimlessly riding through forests and plains, when he spotted an up-and-coming knight in the distance. As they rode past each other, the knight greeted him with a courteous gesture, but he was also carrying some unsettling news. Queen Guinevere had been kidnapped. The news hit Lancelot like a thunderbolt. Guinevere, the woman he loved in secrecy, was in danger. A rush of urgency overcame him, and Lancelot galloped as fast as he could towards Camelot. The quest to rescue the queen became his life's mission, and Lancelot, fueled by love and loyalty, was ready to face any danger to save the woman who dwelt in his heart. The trip back to Camelot was sheer torture for Lancelot. With every league he traveled, his anguish intensified, and the sight of Guinevere in danger tore at his insides. When Lancelot reached the Camelot gates, he was welcomed by Sir Gawain, who was waiting for him with a somber expression on his face.
Lancelot, thank God you have now returned. We need you.
Tell me everything, Gawain. How did the queen get kidnapped? Gawain ushered them inside the castle, where King Arthur was awaiting in his quarters. The mood was heavy, and the court was shocked and dismayed. The knight found out that the queen had been kidnapped by Sir Maleagant, an arrogant and disloyal knight. He was holding her prisoner in an unknown location and wanted to make her his wife. Lancelot was listening attentively, restraining the anger welling up in his throat. The king said that he had dispatched messengers to Sir Maleagant, demanding the queen's immediate release. Several knights were sent to track down the whereabouts of the villain and the queen. My king, I swear on my honor that I will by no means ever return to Camelot until I have saved Queen Guinevere from Sir Maleagant's hands. I will endure any danger, overcome any obstacle, and bring her back unharmed to this court, even if it costs my life. With his mission to rescue Guinevere in his mind, Lancelot got ready for the journey. His eyes, once heavy with anguish, now shone with determination. Sir Gawain, inspired by Lancelot's speech, also resolved to depart in search of the queen. Lancelot went along a narrow, dark path, where he came across a dwarf driving a cart. When he saw Lancelot getting closer, the dwarf asked him if he was looking for the queen. Lancelot said yes, and the dwarf, who detested the ostentation of knights, revealed a mischievous grin and challenged him to climb into the cart and be taken on a parade, so that he could reveal information about Guinevere's whereabouts. Being taken in the cart was a badge of dishonor in those days, and only criminals and prisoners were forced to travel in it. Aware of the humiliation this meant, Lancelot hesitated for a moment. But his love for Guinevere and his resolve to rescue her spoke louder. Lancelot brushed aside the embarrassment and climbed into the cart, following the dwarf in his search for the queen. From that moment on, his adventure took a new direction, punctuated by humility and sacrifice in the name of love. With an eerie smile, the dwarf led Lancelot through tortuous and hidden paths. The cart rattled and swayed, and the knight kept silent, resigned to the humiliation the circumstances imposed on him. After several hours of riding, they reached an imposing castle. Having fulfilled his part of the bargain, the dwarf led Lancelot to the castle gates, and the knight stepped down, feeling the weight of the prying and mocking eyes watching him. The dwarf told him that he would find clues to the queen's whereabouts there. Upon entering the castle, an elegant lady warmly welcomed Lancelot, but the presence of the chariot rider did not go unnoticed, and Lancelot endured the whispers and looks of contempt from the other noblemen present. Even so, he held his head high. But Lancelot was battling an internal conflict. The embarrassment of having traveled in the wagon tormented him, but his love for Guinevere drove him forward. He questioned whether he was being a true knight if he was honoring the chivalric principles by submitting to such humiliation. But deep in his heart, he knew that his fondness for Guinevere was stronger than any moral code, and that he was willing to pay any price to rescue her. At nightfall, Lancelot was guided to a richly furnished room, where a lavish bed awaited him. Drained by the journey and the challenges he had faced, the knight lay down to rest, but sleep did not bring him the peace for which he had hoped. He dreamt that a funeral procession was drawing near, and in the center of it, a familiar figure was being carried, draped in a veil. As he drew closer, Lancelot horrifically identified the pale, motionless silhouette of Guinevere. The sight of his seemingly lifeless sweetheart shook him to the core, and for a moment, hopelessness seemed to overwhelm him. But Lancelot soon noticed that something was amiss. The procession did not exude sadness, and the faces of those who were with it did not reveal any mourning. On closer inspection, he noticed that Guinevere, although pale, was still faintly breathing. Hope was alive. As midnight approached, a flaming spear broke through the window, setting fire to the bed and the room. With sharp reflexes, Lancelot leapt from the burning bed, and with the help of a rug, managed to suffocate the flames and prevent the fire from spreading. The bed test, as it was known, was meant to prove the courage and endurance of those staying there. Again, Lancelot displayed his bravery and decisiveness, coming out of the ordeal without a hitch. Having survived the challenges in the castle and Guinevere's distressing vision, Lancelot received information about the path he had to follow. The next stage of his journey would lead him to the Sword Bridge, a dangerous passageway that protected the kingdom of Gore, Maleagant's domain. As its name implied, the bridge was made of a single, razor-sharp blade that cut through anyone who dared to cross it. Knowing the peril ahead of him, Lancelot showed no hesitation. He mounted up with courage and determination and set off towards the bridge. Upon arriving, he was greeted by a frightening sight. The blade glinted coldly in the sunlight, and the abyss that gaped beneath it seemed to swallow up the light. But the knight was not deterred. He took a deep breath and, with steady, confident steps, began to cross the bridge. Every footstep the blade cut into his flesh, painfully wounding him. Blood ran down his feet, smearing the bridge with a red trail. The knight got off balance and almost fell, but he managed to hold on and pressed on, even though his hands were hurt. But Lancelot did not utter a single groan. His eyes were locked on the objective and his mind focused on Guinevere. Pain was merely an obstacle to be overcome, a price to be paid for his sweetheart's freedom. Lancelot reached the other side of the bridge in what seemed like an eternity. He was hurt and exhausted, but triumphant. The sword bridge, an apparently impenetrable barrier, had been overcome by the power of love. As Lancelot faced dangers and trials in his quest, Guinevere found herself imprisoned in a cold, damp dungeon in Maleagant's castle. The once glowing and soaring queen now found herself locked in a dark and despairing place. Angst and uncertainty consumed her, and the memory of Camelot, Arthur, and Lancelot stirred in her a twinge of longing and melancholy. In his obsession with Guinevere, Maleagant visited her every day, attempting to convince her to accept his love and become his wife. But the queen, loyal to her king and her heart, refused the villain's pleas, standing firm in her resistance. However, Maleagant did not give up his plans, and every day he put more pressure on Guinevere, threatening her with violence and punishment if she did not give in to his wishes. She trusted that Lancelot would come to rescue her, that the knight would endure any danger to save her from the tyrant's hands. This belief provided her with the strength to resist, to hold on to her dignity and hope during adversity. Lancelot, meanwhile, having overcome the sword bridge and nearing Maleagant's castle, was bracing himself for the final clash. Having crossed the sword bridge, Lancelot stepped into the kingdom of Gore, a land beset by a dark and overwhelming atmosphere. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the wind howling between the rocks and the crackling of solitary crows. Lancelot suddenly felt the weight of the atmosphere on his shoulders, as if the air itself was permeated with an evil energy. Then, Lancelot spotted an incoming knight in the distance. He was dressed in imposing armor and a feathered helmet, and his shield sported a coat of arms he could not recognize. Hoping to obtain information about Guinevere's whereabouts, Lancelot sped up to meet the knight. As they got closer, the knight greeted Lancelot with a friendly voice and a polite smile. For his part, Lancelot asked about Queen Guinevere's whereabouts, and the knight was extremely happy to help him. He stated that he knew where the queen was being held and offered to take him there. Relying on the knight's noble appearance and gentle words, Lancelot accepted his offer and followed him down a path off the main road. They came to an imposing castle with high walls and menacing towers. As soon as Lancelot crossed the castle gates, the knight revealed his true intentions. With an evil smirk, he ordered Lancelot to put his hands up, as he had been captured and was now his prisoner. The castle doors slammed shut behind Lancelot, and he found himself encircled by enemies, trapped in an unknown place. He was yet thrown again into a dark, damp dungeon, with stone walls and iron bars. The door shut with a menacing bang, and the knight was enveloped in darkness and silence. The shame of being duped was compounded by the frustration of having been pulled away from his quest for Guinevere. He carefully surveyed his surroundings, looking for a loophole, a weakness in the prison structure. He found that the iron bars blocking the window were rusty and fragile. He managed, with an extraordinary effort, to tear them away from the wall, opening a passage to the outside. Using the night darkness to his advantage, Lancelot started to move stealthily in search of his armor and sword. He was as gentle as a big cat, his steps silent and his movements accurate, while avoiding the creaking of the floorboards. Then a voice suddenly called Lancelot's name. Although it was only a low whisper, The feminine sound was unique to the knight. It was the voice of the woman who dwelt in his heart. Guinevere stood in the small cell lit only by a shimmering candle. When she spotted Lancelot, the queen's face flashed with lightning, and a trembling smile appeared on her lips. With his heart beating fast in his chest, Lancelot grabbed Guinevere's hand and felt that the first stage of his mission had been achieved. But now he had to find a way to free her. Guinevere told the knight that she was certain he would show up to save her. Lancelot succeeded in surprising and defeating the watchman guarding the armory. He managed to recover his sword and armor, and looked set to face Sir Maleagant and bring the weight of the blade of justice down on him. However, as expected, Maleagant was not honorable enough to take on Lancelot in a duel. He ordered his guards to clear the entire world of Lancelot's presence. But this time, Lancelot was ready for combat and would face any adversary standing in his way, knowing that fate works in favor of the righteous. The experienced knight prevented his enemies from surrounding him entirely, preventing him from being struck in the back. Like this, Lancelot defeated one henchman at a time until there was no enemy left between him and the dishonored knight who had kidnapped his queen. Lancelot fought Maleagant with a lust for revenge, attacking with lion-like savagery. His blows, powerful and relentless. Each strike, each defense, bore the force of his outrage at Maleagant's betrayal, the humiliation he had suffered in the chariot, and the suffering inflicted on Guinevere. His opponent teased him further by saying that he could sense in his eyes that such anger came from more than just a sense of duty and justice, that he could clearly see that the knight was desperately in love with his queen. But he had no need to worry, since after the death of the Camelot knight, he would honor him for his courage by naming the son he would have with Guinevere Lancelot. The very sight of Guinevere next to that monster unleashed an unbridled fury in Lancelot's heart. The knight delivered such a brutal blow that he broke his enemy's sword and ended his life. His revenge was now complete, and the cost of having sullied his reputation had been worth it, for the queen was safe. Once her freedom had been secured, the tearful queen threw herself into Lancelot's arms and hugged him tightly. Lancelot embraced her gently, feeling her body shudder in his arms. The feeling of having her there, unharmed, brought unparalleled joy to his heart. In that moment of reunion, the grief and trials of the journey melted away. The knight declared that he would brave any danger or enemy to protect his queen. With its perils and conflicts, the outside world vanished, leaving only Lancelot and Guinevere, bound in a loving and grateful embrace. Lancelot and Guinevere rode off on the same horse towards Camelot. On the way, the knight and the queen recounted the challenges they had encountered that day. That was when Lancelot spoke of his moment of doubt, when he was forced to defile his honor and reputation by climbing into the convict's chariot. Astonished by his confession, Guinevere looked at him with outrage, asking if he had dared, for even an instant, to follow her and rescue her. Lancelot attempted to justify himself, mentioning the code of honor of a knight, but was cut short by Guinevere, who asked him where her honor was as a queen when she found herself on her own and at the mercy of the villain. Perceiving the wrongness of his words, Lancelot became defensive, and the two argued intensely. At the peak of the quarrel, the passion they both felt finally found the break it had been waiting for and escaped the scrutiny of reason. The couple kissed passionately, a whirlwind of restrained emotions finally unleashed. In their moment of prohibited love, Lancelot and Guinevere merged into a single being, forgetting the outside world. Love was shattering its barriers, passion was overcoming reason. Following the passionate kiss, an emotionally charged hush fell between Lancelot and Guinevere. While still embracing, Guinevere, caressing Lancelot's face, sorrowfully whispered that it was a wonderful but fleeting moment. It was a forbidden love, a flame burning in secrecy, never to be shown in the daylight. With his heart aching, Lancelot nodded in agreement, saying that fate had brought them together in an impossible situation. She was his king's wife, the queen he had vowed to protect and serve, and he the knight who was meant to be the most loyal of all at the Round Table. Lancelot took Guinevere's hand, kissed it softly, and said, "Even if our love is never truly fulfilled, my queen, I will treasure this moment in my heart forever. The memory of your love will strengthen me to face any challenge, to overcome any obstacle." With tearful eyes, Guinevere nestled into his arms. The loving couple accepted the real nature of their fate, the impossibility of a future together. But passion raged in their hearts, a shared secret that would unite them forever, even if from a distance, even if in secret. A forbidden love, like a flower born among the stones, now finding a way to bloom in the shadows, sustained by the memory of that moment when it was allowed to burst into life. The Camelot gates were open to welcome Lancelot and Guinevere as heroes. The court jubilantly greeted the knight who had once again proved his bravery and loyalty to the kingdom. With a glowing smile, Arthur wrapped his arms around Lancelot and lavished him with praise. A banquet was held in Lancelot's honor, and the main hall of the castle was awash with music, laughter, and celebrations. The knights of the Round Table raised a toast to the hero, while the ladies stared adoringly at him. In the spotlight, Lancelot accepted the honors with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. The glory and recognition pleased him, but a lingering shadow of guilt and disquiet persisted in his heart. Lancelot felt divided. On one side, the joy of having saved Guinevere and the joy of fulfilling his duty made him feel proud. On the other, the memory of the kiss, of his forbidden love for the queen, tormented him with the awareness of his betrayal. He knew that his love for Guinevere was a menace to his allegiance to Arthur, a force that could destroy everything he had built. After the festivities, Lancelot withdrew into his thoughts, pondering the future and the consequences of his actions. He questioned whether he could resist temptation, and if he could keep his love for Guinevere concealed. He was plagued by uncertainty and inner conflict that endangered his peace and poise. Faced with his turmoil, Lancelot turned to diplomacy as an opportunity to escape. When King Arthur told him he needed an envoy to visit King Pelles of Corbinic, he volunteered to take on the mission. A distant and mysterious kingdom, Corbinic seemed the perfect retreat for a bewildered heart and a spirit in search of peace. He was looking, above all, to find distance from Guinevere. The king's proximity, the glances, the memories of the forbidden kiss, all this tormented him, reawakening the flame of passion and putting him in constant internal conflict. To preserve his honor and the stability of the kingdom, Lancelot needed to avoid the temptation that Guinevere posed. On arriving in Corbinic, Lancelot encountered a kingdom draped in mystery and spirituality. The old serene-looking King Pelles exuded an aura of wisdom and mystical power. His court was like nothing Lancelot had ever seen, with sages, seers, and monks freely wandering around the castle, and conversations about prophecies and sacred fates echoing through the corridors. Pelles was a guardian of ancient secrets, a man bent on fulfilling a sacred prophecy that would dictate the fate of his kingdom and the whole of Christendom. This prophecy heralded the arrival of a chosen knight, the only one able to reach the Holy Grail, the sacred chalice used by Jesus at the Last Supper. According to the prophecy, this knight would be Lancelot's son. Aware of Lancelot's identity and importance, Pelles welcomed him with great honor and hospitality. However, behind this kindness and warmth, the king was hatching a deceitful plan. He intended to pair Lancelot with his daughter Elaine to ensure that the prophecy would be carried out and that the Holy Knight would come into the world. Unaware of Pelles' intentions, Lancelot was drawn into Corbinic's mystical atmosphere. He was lured by the king's wisdom, the stories about the Grail, and the promise of a greater destiny. Nevertheless, his heart still belonged to Guinevere, and the memories of the queen prevented him from fully indulging in this new reality. King Pelles' daughter Elaine was a young and uniquely beautiful woman, with long golden hair, and eyes as blue as the spring skies. Her gentle features and serene expression concealed a dreamy nature and a heart brimming with romantic longings. Raised in an environment steeped in mysticism and prophecy, Elaine nurtured a strong belief in fate and in the higher purposes that guided human life. Elaine was instantly attracted to him. The knight's reputation preceded him, and the tales of his heroic deeds and unshakable loyalty to Queen Guinevere had piqued her curiosity and admiration. On meeting him in person, Elaine was even more entranced. His manly beauty, his noble demeanor, and his detached stare utterly captivated her, awakening in her a love at first sight. Elaine surrendered to her father's plans, ready to do anything to win Lancelot's love and fulfill the prophecy that would alter the fate of Corbinic and Arthur's entire kingdom. King Pelles hatched a plan to bring the prophecy to fruition. With Elaine's help, he poured Lancelot a spellbinding drink, a magical elixir that would alter his senses and fog his mind. Exhausted by the journey and the inner turmoil that plagued him, Lancelot took the drink offered by Pelles and Elaine. He never suspected the intentions of the king and his daughter and considered the drink a gesture of hospitality and kindness. Yet as he drank the bewitched liquid, his senses took a turn for the worse and confusion seized his mind. Under the potion's influence, Lancelot noticed Elaine bearing Guinevere's features. Her eyes, her hair, her sweet smile. Everything about her looked familiar, as if the queen were right there in front of him in Corbinic. His heart was overwhelmed with both confusion and lust, and he approached Elaine, gripped by an unbridled passion. When Elaine noticed the effect of the potion on Lancelot, she gave herself over with a mixture of joy and guilt. She knew that Lancelot was not seeing her as she really was, but the illusion let her indulge in a romantic dream, however short-lived and deceitful. Under the veil of magic and illusion, Lancelot and Elaine bonded in a passion-filled night. Believing he was with Guinevere, Lancelot surrendered himself to love with devotion and intensity. In turn, Elaine reciprocated his passion. When dawn burst the spell, the illusion crumbled with it. Lancelot awoke in an unknown bed, his heart filled with a foreign sensation of emptiness and guilt. Elaine slept serenely beside him, her golden hair scattered across the pillow. But, to Lancelot's horror, Guinevere was no longer to be seen in her features. The magic potion had worn off, and reality was crashing in with the clap of thunder. His mind was swept by a deluge of muddled and disturbing memories. Shards of the night before, images of Elaine mingling with Guinevere, the passionate kiss, the surrender to love. It all now felt like a nightmare, a betrayal of his beloved queen. Shame and remorse ate away at him, and he felt impure, tarnished by the unconscious betrayal he had perpetrated. Lancelot dressed hastily, his mind still in turmoil. He needed to escape from the place that had brought him so much shame. He fled the castle as an outlaw, a traitor, a disgraced knight who had once again broken his vows of loyalty and fidelity. Guinevere's image haunted him, and he wondered if it had all been a trick by King Pelles. The outcome could have been even worse. If Elaine had really been Guinevere, he had committed an act of high treason against his king. He realized that he could no longer restrain the passion he felt for the queen. 9 months after the fateful night in Corbinic, Elaine gave birth to a baby boy named Galahad, Lancelot's baptismal name before he moved to Avalon with the fairies. From the moment he was born, the child bore a holy and pure aura, and the wise men of the Pelles court noticed in him the hallmarks of the prophesied knight, the one bound to attain the Holy Grail. His birth sparked extraordinary joy in Corbinic. King Pelles felt that his grandson was the fulfillment of his plans and the certainty that the prophecy would be met. Despite her sadness and regret at the way she had conceived the boy, Elaine loved Galahad with all her heart and devoted herself to bringing him up with love and devotion. He became a boy of noble and pure character, gifted with an unwavering faith and a profound sense of justice. His goal was clear: to follow in his father Lancelot's footsteps and become a knight of the Round Table. But with an even greater mission: the quest for the Holy Grail that would redeem the world.